Nearly a decade after his death, Andy Warhol continues to capture the American imagination. Joining art with pop culture, his works celebrate fame, fortune, and commercialism. His widespread influence is the subject of many recent films, books, and music. Joining me now, Mary Harron, writer and director of I Shot Andy Warhol. John Cale, a member of the Velvet Underground, whose music Warhol managed and produced. And Robert Rosenblum, professor of fine arts at New York University. Welcome. What is it about Warhol that makes him so fascinating today?
I have a feeling that it's something to do with the end of the century, reaching the millennium, and that we're just looking back at the high points, and that Warhol is the most famous artist of the 60s, and the 60s being that defining decade that somehow we're all obsessed with him. And sometimes I think that when we say Warhol, we're actually saying the 60s.
Yeah.
Something about the time.
Well, I can expand from there insofar as I've always thought of Warhol as one of the great chroniclers of the, well, not the second half of the last 3 or 4 decades of the 20th century. And his scope is so gigantic. I mean, it's like reading Time magazine. He covers everything. You've got, you know, American car crashes, the JFK assassination, the first landing on the moon, all the famous people who ever lived in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, Europe, Africa, America, endangered species. He's got it all. And it's like flipping through decades of news clippings, and there's no other artist who has that global scope.
He was at the center with Jonas Mekas and the Cinematheque at the time, and mixed media, when it started becoming very important in New York, when the Cultural Revolution was going on in the 60s. And his influence went through music as much as through art and a lot of other strands of American culture.
A genius?
Well, I don't quite understand what that means in terms of art, but influential.
Influential, clearly influential.
And when you were around him for any length of time, he really started getting you working. I mean, here there's an amazing ability to get you concerned about finishing off this or finishing off that, but getting on with some work. And that was the ethos at the factory, was a lot of hard work going on all the time.
What was he like, beyond a catalyst for work?
A very shy person who was always generous with his time and gentle, but I think he reinvented himself many times in different ways. And, you know, that interface between art and commercialism really came to a head with him in film during that period that the Velvet Underground and the factory existed there.
And he gave some credence to commercialism?
Well, he allowed commercialism a larger role in art, I think. I mean, there's something about sexuality in American art that's really not quite there. And I think there was more there after he joined it.
His art, did his personality was much bigger than his art, wasn't it?
No, I would say the other.
His art was bigger than the personality?
Yes. I mean, after all, his personality is going to be lost to the next generations, whereas his art is still there, and it's absolutely huge. I mean, as I just said, it is universal in coverage. I mean, it's about history. It's about our time, our century. So just in terms of the wide embrace, it's big. I mean, who he was, people, well, we're not going to know anymore. And a younger generation is just going to be left with what he did.
I think you're right. But the point I was making was that it's just sort of, everybody seems to know who he is, that there is Andy Warhol. I suspect more than people, if you went to them and said, tell me, a lot more people just know that there is an Andy Warhol than know specific works of art that he completed.
Well,
you disagree with that too?
I would say that anywhere in the world, from Asia to even Africa, a Campbell's soup can is an instant symbol of Andy Warhol. I remember reading about how under the USSR regime, artists would treasure, like relics, a reproduction of a Warhol soup can. So it was an instantly recognizable symbol, like Salvador Dali melted watch. Yeah. So, you know, it's the image that remained.
When you asked, if he was a genius, I think in a way he was a genius that he made very complicated things look simple.
Yeah.
And the ideas in his art were very complicated, but they were done in a very simple way. And I think he kind of allowed future generations to kind of say yes to the modern world in a way, to accept the world of manufacturing and mechanical reproduction, say, no, this is art too. The world around us, it is art. We don't have to turn our back on it. We don't have to be abstract. We can just embrace it.
What was his principal accomplishment?
I think probably changing the way we looked at the world, the world around us.
Well, when I think back, it's an enormous list because I think he's a universal genius of sorts. But one of the most extraordinary things that he did at the very beginning of his career in the 60s was to destroy totally the boundaries between art, painting, and the photographic image. I mean, he is really the crucial point in which we slip from one image world into another. And he was right there at the birth of it, and it's just totally part of our visual environment. And artists today of every age are using photography, TV, imagery, you name it, and absorbing it into, the rectangular fields of painting or the 3D of sculpture. And he's really the first person who did that in a full-scale way. So that is an extraordinary response to the changing visual environment.
Is there any mystery to him still? I mean, are the questions unanswered other?
Yeah, the one thing about this ability to solve problems is this magical quality that he has of coming up to solutions for things. He would come and remind us as a band that don't forget to put the swear words in this song, or whatever ideas that we had flying around that we dropped or forgotten about. He would invariably come up and remind us to do it. And they were not ideas, that you would say were songwriters' ideas. They were more conceptual ideas of what songwriting was about and what role they played in a band's life or whatever.
Okay, let me take a look at this. This is a clip from I Shot Andy Warhol. Candy Darling tells Valerie, played by Lily Taylor, about the scene at Max's Kansas City and the factory. Andy Warhol can make me a star. Here it is. Here it is. Roll tape. That looks very... Tell me about making the movie, why you wanted to make it. What was it that...
Well, I had a long-term Warhol fascination, and I'd written a lot about the Velvet Underground and Andy's relationship to music. But really, when I found the story of Valerie Solanas, it was her story, the story of this complete outsider, that really attracted me. And originally, the factory and Warhol weren't going to be that big a part of it. But of course, once you start planning a film, it's so irresistible. The prospect of recreating the factory, and it kind of then took on a life of its own, and it actually took up a bigger part of the film than we planned. Because you can't help it, really.
Well, what is it about him that so intrigued you want to make a movie?
Well, I suppose that in a way...
Other than this sort of link to the 60s.
Well, I think he's an important artist, but that wasn't why I wanted to make a film about him, because I think it's very hard to make a film about an artist or an artist's... I wasn't interested in making a film about somebody's process of creation, because I think it's unfilmable. I was interested in his world. And I suppose in that scene that you just saw, it's how he managed to take these very unlikely people who were talented but would never have made it in the outside world, would never have been stars, drag queens or speed freaks, and he understood the magic of the camera, and you just put the camera on them, and then something of their personality would go onto the film. You know about that,
The
right?
screen test. The only person who didn't sit still for a screen test was Bob Dylan. And but usually what he got on film was just extraordinary. I mean, people that you wouldn't expect to have dramatic ability would suddenly burgeon in front of the camera.
And I think that's why all those people were so obsessed with him, because they could see that he had almost this quality of endowing them with stardom, which is in some ways what everybody wants in the modern world.
And among his time in New York, he was the biggest sort of magnet for a group of people?
I think in the art, well, I mean, obviously there were so many different worlds. I mean, probably in the pop world, Bob Dylan would have been a bigger magnet. But
There were a lot of people hanging around the factory that really would work on silk screens with everybody. But also, there will be a show at some point, I suppose, of all the trip books that were made at the time, which is, from the pharmacological speed trip to sitting down for hours and end just drawing in books. And these books are just a document of what went on in those years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought in terms of a magnet, that in a way he's as much of a magnet now, I think, in terms of his mythology,
Yes.
in the sense that somehow he seems to be more important or more of an image now.
What did he understand that made him famous? What was his insight that sort of was worth taking note of?
Well, I think the main thing is that he walked out of the ivory tower of the 1950s into the real world out there.
Into the world of celebrity and
just
pop
everything.
culture. And
supermarkets, telephones, comic strips, you name it, but just all of the grit that is the reality of America. And, I mean, it was a huge quantum leap. I mean, to move from a world of art where everybody was supposed to be Van Gogh only a couple of generations later, doomed, isolated, saintly, and he, you know, just got it and liked everything that was out on the streets. And, you know, that was an enormous change in the history of culture and the history of art.
how do you best remember him?
As a real inspiration for keeping your mind on your art, and keeping your mind on what you're supposed to be doing.
No one like him, right?
Well, no one believed it. I mean, that somebody could be so mischievous and play games on such an international scale and still be an easy person to get along with, or not have a mean bone in his body. And, you know, there may be a myth, you know, that he's created around himself about how he understood money. Maybe understanding money is not something that artists are supposed to do.
So the fact is that he did understand money very well.
Very well. And somehow or other toyed with it and played with it as an image and put himself right in the middle of it.
And knew how to use it in terms of...
Absolutely.
And
effectively.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me, despite all of the pop culture and despite all of the quality of his art, there was at the center this sense of sort of practicality and the work ethic.
Definitely.
Amidst all of the joy and all of the funniness and all the craziness and all of the weirdness. There was
That's
practicality.
why it's called the factory.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, that's one thing that I got when I was looking at all the kind of images and before the shooting, was how much work was created there, and also how much fun he had, in the sense that it did seem like also his playground.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.